Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, hear about disease control at the different soybean growth stages. Tar spot and southern rust are yet again showing up in fields. We discuss weighing your options to maintain yield potential. And Turk discusses the importance of not giving up on the 2024 corn and soybean crop, highlighting advice from Ken Ferrie.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have our regulars. We got Ben, Lynn, and Turk. And Ben, you're going to lead the discussion, right?
Sure. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about staging soybeans. This is the time of year where staging soybeans is extremely important, whether it be for the guys in the north that are looking at white mold, if it's for everybody else that's looking at fungicide, whether I pull the trigger on fungicide on soybeans or not. So staging is extremely important. We want to start by that R1 is considered first flower. A lot of the times we will see R1 show up sometime in the time frame around the 21st of June. If you have super early planted beans, you can see that a little bit earlier. If they're a little bit later, like May 15th and later planted, a lot of times it'll be in that July 1st through the 4th time frame. A lot of flowers out there right now. Yeah, so basically R1 is where there is any flowers on any of the plants. So as soon as you see the first bloom, that would be when you want to go in and start targeting the white mold fungicide applications. And there's a really good list on the integrated crop management website that gives you a list of all the fungicide efficacies, and if you're looking for white mold, that has a really nice list on it. R2 is there's a flower on the top two most upper nodes, and then where a lot of the guys are looking at right now is R3, which would be considered basically a pod that's 3/16 of an inch long in any of the top four nodes of the plant. So
Ben, on white mold control, Cobra is labeled for white mold control.
yes.
And it's a herbicide.
Yep.
But it's labeled for it because it's not used at the high rate, what we call, or the fry rate, you might say. Mm-hmm. It's used at a lower rate, but it somehow stimulates the immune system, I believe, in some fashion.
And I don't know if, I believe that is the case because it's definitely on the label, but I don't know if it's that immune. I don't know if it's the immune system stimulation or if it is the fact that you are literally bringing air in through the canopy. Because everything about white mold is you want to reduce the humidity in that canopy because there's these itty bitty little mushrooms that pop up out of the ground that have to live in a high humidity, high moisture situation. So that's why white mold is typically worse in years where there's a lot of humidity and leaf wetness.
Yeah, locally, where I live in Fort Madison, there's lots of white toad stools about this tall. So we know we have a lot of fungal activity going on right now because of the recent rains and then lots and lots of dew.
Yeah, I foresee it being a pretty bad white mold year this year. So
when you talk about staging there as well, I guess it's something that for those that are out there that potentially have multiple plant dates, we could look at some situations where from an enlist standpoint on the herbicide label, we're allowed to get through R1. Do you see instances where we might have to do a second pass of herbicide and we're probably bumping into some fungicide timing? I guess what's your professional recommendation on that? If a guy goes, I'd like to kill two birds with one stone, do you take care of one and then come back and do the other, or while you're making the trip, go ahead and throw that then into the tank mix?
Technically, you're not allowed to apply that herbicide after R1. So.
Yep, so the label's a law. Mm-hmm. So you always got to follow the...
It's through R1.
It's through R1, so it'd get you to basically right at R2, which is what that staging, like what we talked about, it would be flowers up until the top portion of the plant. So yeah, if you wanted to kill two birds with one stone, it's all a matter of what's $6.5 or $7.5 an acre worth to you. I think there's a reason that R3 time frame is what you're really trying to target, and whether that be stress reduction and trying to maintain as many flowers that are on that plant to get them to set into pods, whether that be the insecticide that's with it to keep stress off the plant from that direction too, from like the Japanese beetle feeding, like everything else that's going on out in that field. So that R3 time frame is pretty critical, and I think a lot of guys have missed that R3 time frame typically because they're actually out there looking for pods. They're not looking for what is essentially a pod that just had the flower fall off the end, and that's where most guys miss that, because you really do. I mean, it's a good practice to literally go out and grab a tape measure, set it down on the tape measure, and that 3/16 of an inch isn't very big. So I know some fields that are April planted that are probably into R4 already, April 10th planted, April 15th planted that are into that R4 stage. But yes, there are some later planted beans that are very rapidly coming on to this R2, R3 time frame, and it's going to be very, very difficult for a lot of guys to get some of these sprayed with the rains that have been happening, and the weeds are getting tall. Like there's going to be some heartache.
Yeah, look at situations where late planted couldn't get the pre on, so they're looking at a 2-post pass program when it comes to that, and they're going to be at a potential disadvantage when it comes to some of the staging stuff as well, because we're going to hit reproductive and vegetative all at the same time. So it's just going to be extremely important in those situations to make sure your boots in the field and checking out your plant, because especially if you're going to use like Liberty and using the high gallonage, high pressure, anything that we have right now in the flower form, we want to make sure that we preserve and not knocking that off. So that potentially could lead to a little bit of management decisions as far as you run Enlist Liberty Roundup, or do you go to an Enlist and Roundup situation? Do you have to clean up volunteer corn? You get looking in certain situations and you're stacking a lot into one trip, and at the end of the day, I guess I would be more comfortable if you're making that pass, make sure you're killing those weeds first and foremost. That's number one. And you can always, like you said, come back and hit the fungicide at a later date. And it might be more efficacious for both products as well.
And with the Liberty price down, robust rates are highly recommended if you got tall weeds, besides the high gallons.
Correct. And they're out there.
32 ounces of Liberty isn't cutting it this year. I don't know if the weeds are hardened off or they're just bigger than anybody's, but it's just, I've heard that from multiple people that 32 ounces is not cutting it. 40 is the new minimum, and max label rate is, I believe, 43.
43, 44.
So definitely be looking at that.
There's an old saying that says, why is it that we got time to do it twice but don't have time to do it right the first time? So
right.
Use that robust rate.
Yep, and I did want to make a note too that for your question about the label is the law on the timing. If you remember correctly, we were able to spray Enlist 1 and Roundup through R2. So from an efficacy standpoint, hurting the plant standpoint, yes, it's an off-label application, but I do want guys to remember that we were able to spray through R2 with Enlist and Roundup when the label first came out. But I think they're either trying to make it match more the Liberty label or match more the dicamba label to try to reduce whatever volatility may be associated with Enlist, which we know is slim to none.
Good point.
So, is there anything else we wanted to hit on that?
Nope, I think you got it.
Okay. There's also, I've been doing a little bit of scouting. Silk feeding is happening. So whether that be corn rootworm beetles or Japanese beetles, definitely time to get out and scout those cornfields. A lot of the corn that is starting to tassel and it looks pretty decent right now, that's definitely something you want to keep your eyes on, because there is Japanese beetles and corn rootworm beetles out there. It'd be a good time to get out and check for disease as well when you're in your cornfields. We both all noted here that it's been at least 7 days, probably going on 10 days of very, very heavy dew and some form of rainfall. So that's Darren Mueller's way of the old shoe test in the morning is his correct environment. And when your shoes are sopping wet in the morning walking across the grass, that is the correct environment for tar spot and many other diseases to be present. So I'm just keep marking the days off on the calendar, and I kind of foresee with the forecast that we have, I think we're going to keep seeing dew in the mornings, heavy dews.
As we discussed before filming, I mean, we're setting up exactly almost to a T. We could do the same episode from last year over again, that we're in that same period of either we're getting measurable moisture or we are getting a measurable amount of dew in the morning. And when it comes to that, tar spot definitely has to be on the forefront of your scouting and crop protection thoughts as we enter this pretty critical period. Because as we discussed before, for even our first planted stuff, we still have a long ways to go to get to our final grain fill and grain yield period here. So there's a lot of crop left to develop and a lot of opportunity to maintain yield potential. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing with tar spot we run into is that it's not so much yield enhancement. We want to protect the yield that we have in the moment that we first see tar spot.
Ben, I got a question for you with this hurricane that just went through most of our area. How much southern rust are we going to have this year?
There is a website, and I think it's very similar to the Tar Spot website, where there is, I think it's part of the integrated crop management, that whole group. You might take a little bit of a Googling to figure it out, but it shows what counties are active for southern rust, like what you were talking about. To me, when I was looking at that website last, a lot of the counties were in that Georgia and east. I don't know that they necessarily were in the same track of barrel that went through to be blowing some of that stuff up, but it's definitely got a lot of guys talking and wondering. But if you were in that area that received rain out of that storm, I would definitely be keeping an eye on things, because it's going to be about 7 to 10 days, and you're going to start seeing stuff show up.
And that's a very devastating fungus too, as far as corn development.
Yep. A lot of guys in the South had, if you have early planted corn, they go ahead and get it sprayed at VT. They get these hurricanes that come up. Well, guess what? You're opening your wallet one more time, because you're coming right back around and having to have a second fungicide application, because you didn't know whether we were going to get hurricane season or not. So it's something to keep your eye on, but I don't know how that works. I am not an expert in southern rust when it comes to, do you have to be just in the wind flow, or do you have to be in the rain flow from where that happens?
If it works like wheat, it's usually the wind flow. Moisture obviously got to be there too, but we get stripe rust and common rust. It all comes out of the South, so it has to somehow get up into the Midwest if it follows. So I would assume that corn and wheat rust are
very
similar way that get transported into the Midwest.
It would definitely be something to keep an eye out for.
The good news is those areas that got rain from barrel needed rain,
yes,
and they're going to be able to afford to put on that fungicide, because the rain that they got is going to kick their yields up dramatically.
Yeah. Yep. Nope. It's just going to kill everybody else around them, because the price of corn keeps falling.
I think on rust too, for those, I would say in southeast Iowa and north, that's not a necessarily common issue that we run into. I think the last time that we ran into it was 2019, 20, somewhere around there, and we believe that we probably caught it at the tail end of the development cycle of the corn, and it really didn't affect yield. In hindsight, I think I could probably confidently say that we misjudged the timing of that rust, and it did take a little bit of the yield from that. Not to mention that John Deere combine started to look a little case-ish and gleaner-ish by the time everything ran through. So once again, that to me, that R5 period is a critical period to continue your scouting up to that point, and I would say even beyond that. But if we're just going to make a laissez-faire recommendation, if you're not to that R5, don't stop walking your fields, and don't put that checkbook away and think that you're safe for the season. I mean, we've done a pretty decent job, I think, as an industry and as a farming group. Of it used to be that we got through tassel and we're done with the crop. We got to continue to keep monitoring that up to that standpoint, and you can probably argue if you want to go even further than that from that standpoint. But I think last year we got to that, or that last time we had rust, we got to that tassel period, and then we thought we were probably R3-ish and thought we were good, and I think we left potentially 5 to 15% of the yield on the table by not going after that. And then from that point, when we noticed it was an explosion in the fields, and by the time harvest rolled around, it was a pretty significant issue that underestimated, I guess, for lack of better terms.
Yep. And Allison Robinson, and I can have Alex throw the graph up, but she had a great graph showing basically you're just buying yourself time.
Correct.
With the fungicides. So you got to kind of be ahead of it, but scouting does work with things like rust and things of that nature, because you're just buying yourself time, and you got to figure out when the infection is going to happen, of what disease, and that's how. I mean, it's a little bit of a crystal ball, but when you find the right time period that you want to protect, that's when fungicides become extremely relevant.
Yeah, because you're not going to cure it. I mean,
right.
At the end of the day, we're just trying to get through grain development and have the crop basically set in place before the major issues when it comes to either foliar degradation or hopefully not stalk rot, but potential issues with pith and standability.
Right.
Sounds good. Turk, what do you have?
I just wanted to kind of echo some thoughts that Ken Ferrie had this week about never abandon that crop.
Yes.
And so that means that in those areas where you've got yellow corn on the side hills and everything else, you have to you have to figure out what we need to do to try and get that, because it can make the difference. Not abandoning the crop right now can make 50 bushels difference in your end result, or more. And so if you need to put on some extra nitrogen, figure out a way to get it on. I don't care how you do it. If you need to perk that stuff up, because we know we've lost nitrogen in those really wet spots. So if you have to figure out a way to do it. If you got to do it with the drone, whatever you got to do, you got to figure out a way to do that. Same way with the fungicides, and just like you said, wherever barrel went, if we got rust that's going to be coming, don't stop looking. If you need to do something, you got to do it, because it can take some dramatic top off that, or enhance your yield even more than what you would even think about getting without doing something. So never abandon the crop as long as you have something growing out there.
I thought he had a really good point in that we want to go out and count nodes on, if you got something that's a little bit behind, you might want to take a look at. Maybe that plant didn't necessarily get the height, but it still has the same node. So you might have V10 corn right beside each other, and one is 8 foot tall and one is 6 foot tall, but you're still at the same development, and that stuff that is still the same node still carries a pretty good yield potential. Whereas, if you just assume that it's a 4 or 5 stages behind, then maybe that's not necessarily the right thing. So you don't want to give up that potential if that corn is the same node development or same stage of development. So I thought that was a really good point that he made, to make sure that you're making sure that your development stages are pretty uniform, just because optically they might not look that way.
The best way to lower your cost of production is have yield.
Yes.
And that's still the bottom line across the board.
You're absolutely correct. There's a lot of farmer sentiment right now about trying to give up on the crop, and the only thing that they're spending money for is to help the insurance man out. And I think there's a lot of good crop out there. We just need to keep our eye on things, and you are absolutely correct. 50 bushel, 60 bushel, 70 bushel is still on the table for guys that are taking care of their crop.
Practices right now.
Yes. Yep. I might have made a mistake when I was talking about some of those maps. Crop Protection Network is where you're going to find the rust maps, the active rust maps, and the tar spot maps. So Google Crop Protection Network, rust maps, disease maps, whatever, and that'll get you where you need to be.
So, it's going to be really warm this weekend. In fact, hot. We're going into summer and it is hot. So I thought, well, let's get ready for it by having some "it's so hot" jokes. So I got home, wanted to take a shower, but my wife used up all the cold water. That's how hot it is. Okay. The other thing I might mention about how hot it is, it's so hot I saw a bird pull a worm. It's so hot that I saw a bird pull a worm out of the ground with an oven mitt. That's how hot it is.
Yeah.
It's so hot that chickens are laying omelets. It's so hot that hot water comes out of both taps now. Well, anyhow, there you go. That's enough. We're gonna lose everybody if we keep going here. It is gonna be warm, so you know what that means. Stay hydrated, right?
Yep.
And usually water works best. Okay. Anyhow, thanks for watching today. We sincerely appreciate your business. We hope your crop is doing well. Hope your family is safe and healthy. We'll see you next week.